All right, here we go. Part two with Jamala. Uh, we're going to talk about the SHU program. We're going to talk about the end of hostilities, and we're going to talk about what came about to um, end some practices that had been going on for a long time. So once again, Jamala, thank you for being here, man. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I appreciate any time I can have a platform to kind of speak this truth.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. And there's a lot of people who get a lot of different narratives from a lot of different sources, and not all those people have been in those places, and not all those people have a positive mindset today. Some of their agendas, you may be, uh, different, just to say it that way. But I wanted to ask you a few questions and to familiarize myself and everybody who's watching with, like, how did it come about in CDCR? Well, at the time it was California Department of Corrections, that people were housed in the SHU for decades on end without any end in sight. Like, how did that happen?
Um, well, I would, and keep in mind, this is like passed down, like shared knowledge. I wasn't in prison in the 70s and early 80s, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. But prison was really politicized in the 70s with folks like George Jackson and the Soledad Brothers of San Quentin Six. And it really folded itself into the greater movement of Black liberation and empowerment that was going on the streets. And that was um, an incredible threat to the system, both the system of government on the street and the California Department of Corrections. And they sought to neutralize it. And one of the things they did was kind of criminalize the awakening of Black folks inside the system in terms of coming back to culture. Um, Learning our language, Swahili. I don't know if you know this, but that's actually outlawed in CDC to speak Swahili.
Hmm.
If you're caught speaking Swahili, you will actually get a point toward validation. They consider it gang activity.
Dang,
So that was the counter
I
to,
did not know that.
yeah, that was the counter to the Great Awakening. They kind of tried to vilify and really shape our entire movement and our newfound awakening into a gang construct. And with that, they were able to kind of create the indeterminate validation process.
I just knew certain words, like when you're in the hole, you hear the Indugu, and there's different terms you hear from different people about
Mhm.
different things. But I did not know that, man.
Yep. Yep.
It kind of leads me to the next question. Like, what was the criteria at the time that you're familiar with where they could just snatch somebody up off the yard and say, hey, you're validated or you this? Like, aside from violent acts, which is obviously, their shoot term offenses, but like, what could they just grab people for that hadn't committed a violent act and were pretty much just programming as far as anybody else could see?
Well, first and foremost, a violent act alone did not constitute gang activity.
Hmm.
You could murder somebody and get a 5-year shoe term and be right back in general population.
Yeah.
Or you could be identified as a member or associate of three prison-based groups. And I won't get into naming and all of that, but groups that allegedly were formed inside the California prison system.
Hmm.
And if you are determined to be an associate or member of those groups, they created a policy where you had to be housed in the security housing unit, the SHU. Now, how they identified this or the structure around identification was it took 3 points. Now, this was supposedly due process. So those points could be anything. Maybe you're already validated, identified as a member or an associate, and it's my birthday, and you send me a card.
Mm.
That's a point because you're validated. Maybe they go through my property and find your wife's phone number in my phone book. That's a point because
Hmm.
you're validated. Any number of reasons. Maybe somebody gets so desperate to get out of solitary confinement that they decide to debrief, which is, in prison vernacular, snitching.
Hmm.
Uh, and they tell everything they know. In addition to what's factual, there's always some lies. And back at that time, dudes would create these laundry lists. Well, this person's a member, this person's a member, this person's a member, and say your name found itself in that. That is considered to be true, and that becomes a point. And you'll never have the opportunity to confront that person who just essentially put you in the security housing unit for the rest of your life. They'll give you a snippet of what that person said, not attached to a name, and that could be enough along with two other points. They also use tattoos and different symbols that are allegedly related to specific groups and organizations. But one of the biggest thing they did was they controlled the narrative. They took what, you know, at least amongst the black population inside prisons, considered to be revolutionary organizations and pushed them under the banner of gangs, gangs, gangs. And over time, that's how they became known as gangs, although that's really not what they were. They were absolutely revolutionary organizations acting in concert with a lot of the more famous groups on the streets.
Yeah. There's some stuff that I read just because I was at San Quentin about the guys you were mentioning earlier. The San Quentin Six and George Jackson, and there was some stuff that had happened. There's supposedly, from what I heard, like one of the guys that got a gun in, and then supposedly they were shooting at cops, and then one of the cops brought in a Tommy gun, and he was shooting at the inmates, and it was like a real shootout within Ad Seg at a certain kind of time, and I think that was before or after a guy. There was some guys going to court, outside court. I think it was in Oakland or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then everybody in that vehicle was killed. It was like the people who were hostage got killed, the people that were on trial got killed. Like everybody in the van got shot up. And anyway, those were some of the things I remember reading about. But so I kind of think I know what you're talking about. But kind of like moving to the newer stuff, the newer age. Um, in some of our conversations, you were talking about spending a lot of time back there in the shoe, and I was just curious, like, what was it that they grabbed you for, and what do you feel like was wrong or right about it? Not that there was anything right about it. Um, and what is your perspective on that?
So I was identified as a member of a particular group.
Yep.
I was removed from general population. My membership was confirmed allegedly by the state based largely on confidential information. Folks
Yeah.
I never got to confront or even test the entirety of the information that was used.
Yeah.
When they're using confidential information, maybe the entire confidential report is 300 pages. You might get a snippet, like a half a paragraph. You can't really fight that, and you don't know who, when, where, none of it. So that was the flimsy evidence that actually got me sentenced to an indeterminate SHU term.
Yeah. No, man, I've had a very, very small example of what you're talking about happen to me where I was trying to transfer from one prison to another prison to be closer to family. And my counselor was like, "Well, I can't put you up for that prison." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And they were like, "Well, there's something from your file." And I didn't know what they were talking about. And then finally, like she was like, she pulled up the computer, showed me a picture, turned her computer towards me, and goes, "You know this dude?" And I looked, and I was like, I know who that is. And she was like, "Well, he's there and you can't go there." You know what I mean? No explanation, no nothing. So not getting snatched off the yard, but that happened to me a few different times. So I know like how painful for me it was to like, what? You know what I mean? Sometimes I would just introduce somebody to somebody else, just something simple, and I would be implicated in something. So I feel you, man. Like not to the extent that you went through because you spent a lot of time back there, but just a snippet of what you're talking about as far as a tactic and an investigative thing, and then like having no kind of like, I can't confront this person, I can't question what they said, I don't even get a chance to defend myself. That part I get.
And
Um,
let me just tell you that like that part of the game, you have people who will do that just because they don't want to go to a certain pen.
mhm,
Say there's a possibility they can go to Pelican Bay and they don't want to go there and they know you're there. They'll be like, hey, this person's my enemy. So
yep,
now you're their enemy. So now 10 years later, you're not there. This person's been all around the system and you're trying to get close to your house, but they're still your enemy.
yeah.
So now you can't go. That's how the system is often manipulated.
there,
Yeah.
there was a dude I met eventually along the road who did like just what you're talking about. He was a professional roll-up artist, man. This dude, we used to joke around. There's a little anthem. He used to say, "Nothing can stop me. I'm rolling it up." And but yeah, um, so like when you first get up there, I'm sure you're angry and you're mad and you know what I mean. And the only thing for me, like when there's nothing else you could do, is for me was study. I started getting into law books, legal stuff, what's going on, what's happening, what can I do about it, case law records. And eventually, some guys back there got together and did just that, right, with this hunger strike. And so, but you were back there about 21 years before,
I was back there 15 years, from
15 years, okay.
2015.
So, like, say maybe from the first day to that time, like, what was your mindset at that time? Like, I'm just stuck back here. I'm going to do anything I can to get out. Like, how did that go?
Well, first and foremost, I was too young and dumb to be mad at being up there.
Yeah,
I had been to Pelican Bay numerous times, like, but just for determinate infractions, 2 years here, 1 year there. So I was already familiar with, all the regulars, and they were familiar with me. And I saw it as an opportunity to educate myself in a sense. I mean,
hmm,
these were the cats who were back here were like legendary figures. Those books that we read, this
yeah,
is the people in the books, and
yeah.
all of a sudden you're there and you can soak that up and build trust and build those relationships and be fully embraced. And so I was too young and dumb to be upset or to fully appreciate how much time I was actually going to spend back there. So I kind of fell into that part of it. And there's a saying, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'll just paraphrase. But George Jackson, we turned every cell into university, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. Especially when they made the short corridor, that just became university. I mean, we studied every book I borrowed from somebody. I was required to write a book report on it to make sure I understood what I was reading.
Yeah.
So I truly grew up and matured from a young man to a fully seasoned man, but also I became an educated man, and I'd never been that formally. So yeah, that was my university.
That's cool. There's a song by Sting and what's the group called the Police, and there's one little line in there. He goes, I came here seeking knowledge, that which would they wouldn't teach me in college. And I remember thinking about that in prison. As heartbroken and as desolate as that environment may be or seem like to some people, when you really tap in with the right people, and you think like, wow, on this entire universe, God, you know what I mean? Everything is under His creation. So an older gentleman, a lifer, sat down one time and he was talking to me. He goes, it sounds like you feel like your dad didn't love you when you were growing up. And I was like, nah, man. And he goes, well, your heavenly father does. And I was like, what? And he was like, he created this place so you and I could meet and talk. And I started looking at the world in a different place, like as crazy as that sounds, I really did appreciate that time I got to spend with that man and the wisdom and the, intellect and just the structure, guidance, and discipline that I gleaned from him. So I know exactly what you're saying, man. And
The,
it's cool. Education is neat. And when you got another grown man who you look up to or is famous in some way, shape, or form, I can see how could be an exciting time.
that saying, the roads that grew from concrete, like that's a
Yeah,
real thing.
yeah,
What's not often accounted for is, especially in that environment, sometimes the concrete can crush the roads,
yeah,
and there were those who were crushed by it. A brother of mine used to always refer to those as broken men, the ones who allowed that immediate environment and the hardship, the mental, psychological, emotional hardship that was brought to bear over a prolonged period of time to just absolutely crush them. Broken men. And I was committed to not being that, a broken man.
yeah, yeah. That's cool, man. I know, like a lot of time, like they talk about PTSD and guys who come home from different wars or whatnot, and they'll say that the ones who come home broken or screwed up or go, to other lengths, they say that a lot of that stuff has to do with like childhood trauma and that they already had, you know what I mean? Like something going on that was never addressed. And this is a continued symptom of the sickness, is the behavior. And just in the youth authority with people who would end their own, in themselves, I always felt bad and I always wondered like what it was they were going through. And two, like why didn't they talk to nobody? And you kind of know, well, some certain people don't want to talk about certain things to other people. They're embarrassed or ashamed, and it just spins around in their head. And like you said, some people are crushed by the weight of the situation, the gravity. I mean, gravity's the same for us all. We're all here on Earth. Newton proved that, but um, it's sad, man, that certain people didn't make it.
And the truth is, we all have a little something, a little mental health something, a little unresolved something. That environment was built to exploit that little something and turn it into a big something. And if it didn't exist, to create that little something and turn it into a big something.
Yeah,
That's really at the heart of the inhumanity of that system,
yeah,
right? It was built to do that.
yeah.
Their their objective was to crush the men in men for a prolonged period of time.
There was I want to say it was that Scott Kernan interview with Oprah Winfrey
Mhm.
that I first heard that I think it was the CIA had designed those type of housing, you know what I mean, in the segregation or solitude, and they were using it to get terrorists basically to go crazy and
Mhm.
then spill their guts to say everything that is on their mind to get out of that situation. So knowing that, did you ever see anybody? I mean, obviously you did, but did you ever see anybody like in that slow process where they turned and then slowly
Oh,
lost it, and you're like, dang, he's gone, and there's
yeah.
nothing you could say to bring him back?
I've seen dudes come in who were staunch, steadfast soldiers, and in 90 days, they were wiping feces all across their body and screaming uncontrollably.
Hmm,
I've seen men break slowly. It always starts with paranoia. Hey, man, y'all talking about me? That kind of shit. And it just
hmm,
keeps hostility. Then stuff, yelling, then maybe throwing feces. And it's just a step by step thing. I've seen it several
yeah.
times. Yep.
So not just being back there, but now instead of having like camaraderie, it's like now everybody's against me, and then that starts to. I think Tupac said something like that. The seeds gave birth and hatched, and then those worms started eating his brain up, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And it's solitude, man, for the most part. I mean, you could talk through the drain or the vent or something like that, but it's like it's a lot of solitude, man. You in a cell literally with no window
yeah,
for decades on end. I mean, it's an intense pressure being brought to bear.
yeah. That's one thing when I was younger, man. Even if you had them windows that were like they had that paint on them, if you could, if somehow time had scratched a little, you could see a little crack or just
Mhm.
something. The new county jails are built like that with no windows, and it's basically trying to mirror, the exact same kind of that honeycomb cell, the showers in the cell, the bunks right there, and yeah, that ain't no fun, man.
And it's funny that you would use the word mirrored because that's how this movement started. I was in prison in the 90s when there was a terrible atrocity. A young lady, a child, Polly Kloss, was murdered by
Yeah,
somebody who had just gotten out. And that just set the state in a completely different direction. It's tough on crime and
yeah,
thorough key. There was no rehabilitative programs inside the state prison. They came out with all of this enhancement. You can commit a crime today that carries 5 years and walk out of court with 50 years or
hmm,
even life or 100 years. And all of these different laws and enhancements really were birthed in the 90s during this movement. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to be in this lock them up mindset, you have to have somewhere to put these people that you're locking up at an increased rate. So you have prison expansion. And with that, you have the expansion of solitary confinement. And it wasn't just limited to California. I mean, every state was trying to outdo the other. You had places like small places like Connecticut with these over $1 billion solitary confinements, and they got a population about this big.
hmm,
And the goal was to improve on it. Like every state would have these tours of other states who were planning, and then they would plan what they would improve on. So you ask yourself, well, what is improving on solitary? That's making it more restrictive,
yeah,
more difficult, applying more pressure to the men in it, seeing folks crack. And that was a real thing. And today we're like unwinding the effects or fighting to unwind as you see with the passage of the youth offender laws that allow folks like myself to get out. Now we're working on we're working on our LWAP brothers. They've shut down the death penalty in terms of death row. They still have the death penalty, but those guys are back in the general population. So we're making great gains, but we still unwinding all of that stuff from the 90s.
Yeah. I was doing some studying at one point in time, and I might misquote something. So just but you brought up the guy Richard Allen Davis, and I remember looking up specific laws that were out during the time of Governor Brown when he changed the death penalty to LWOP. You know, and people like Charles Manson came off of death row and got out in the population, and it was like mid 70s, I think, and there was what they call a habitual offender. You know, guys used to get they hit me with the bitch. They used to call it the bitch, and it was a sort of like three strikes. You know what I mean? And you could get 30 years or more. You know, with that. So they could have gave Richard Allen Davis the habitual offender on his prior felony. He had already had, I think, two or three. He had a kidnapping, he had a robbery, he had like a burglary. So it wasn't really like they needed to create the three strikes law. You know, they did use that horrific, horrible tragedy that happened to put a face to the bill. Also, another one was in Fresno, the Brady bill. There was a guy who had got out and he had killed a lady and in a robbery, just a senseless.
I don't know if was that Brady or was that Mike Reynolds?
Maybe it was Mike Reynolds.
His daughter got caught up in the middle of a shootout. So now
Yeah,
you
yeah,
got he ended up running for Congress and he passed something called 10-20 life. If you
yes,
crime and you got a gun on you, it's an enhancement of 10 years. If you brandish it, it's 20. If you fire it, it's life.
yeah,
Regardless if you hit anybody or not.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so that's what that was that era of tough on crime and that fueled the explosion of the California prison system. And if you look at prison and I'm just going to throw this out there, this is what I think based on my observations and
Hmm.
being there, but statistically I haven't researched it. But I feel like at that time the average age of folks in prison went from around 40 to around 20. So now
Yeah,
all of a sudden you got 20-year-olds with triple life, 4 life sentences, 5 life sentences,
yeah,
people who've never lived and have thrown their lives away due to various reasons,
yeah.
some very serious, some not so serious. And that's the population of prison. And you had an explosion of what? Violence, gangs, all of those things.
A big part of that too was 1995. I got sentenced. I was 15 years old. I had committed a violent crime. Got sent to the youth authority. And what I didn't know, but I did find out later in the law library, was that if the county was to keep you in a group home or try to, do like a boot camp or whatever kind of local rehabilitation, they would foot the bill. But if they sent you to the youth authority, the state would pick up the bill, right?
Mhm.
And what happened in 1996, that changed. They changed. So 95, the to be sent to state prison or tried as an adult, you had to be 16 or over. 96, they changed it to 14 or over. So you could be younger and be sent to prison. And then they got rid of that M number thing in 96 when there was a lady in YTS. She was a counselor. She was killed down there. And then so that sent all the M numbers to state prison. They were guys 19, 20, 21, 22. They're doing what they call like a juvenile life, and when they turn 25, they'd send them to prison. But now when they turn 18, they're going straight to CDC.
Mhm.
And so a lot of what you're talking about is all the law changes. Juvenile crime. There was a big thing back then. They thought, well, if you're young, you can get away with it. You could do juvenile life and be no big deal. And then when they started sending everybody to prison, you're talking about that influx of the youth being there, and then the youth authority was kind of crazy and off the hook, and there was no structure or real politics like you have in prison. It was just off the hook, you know what I mean? And I think that was a wave of what really destroyed what the old ways were in CDC too.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and it so like kind of getting back to the hunger strike part. Um, I've heard some stories. Guys got together, all different races, all different groups, said, "Hey, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this," and they were just like, "Yes." But leading up to that, like how bad were things before it really got to the hunger strike, and then what happened during that?
So, like I said, I've been to Pelican Bay SHU several times. I think 3 times prior, Cork and SHU a few times. I was well traveled in the whole.
Yeah,
Um, in the 90s, the policy in Pelican Bay SHU, first, we could have cellies back there so you can move in the cell, that kind of stuff. But the ratio policy was it was professional, it was respectful, but if the doors crack, it's on.
Hmm.
Is going down. And that was just what it was for many, many years. I think I came back up there in the mid 90s, and a really well known, let's say, elder statesman for the Southerners who I know. He came to my door. He like, man, look, you've been gone for a minute. Woo, woo. This changed, and now, like if the door is open and my people come out, is good. You're in a defensive posture, they in the defensive posture. It's not like it was, which was cool. But I was gonna verify, so I had to the verification. But that's one of the big things that changed, and that was like a chink in the armor. And this was way back in '95. So when I got validated in 2000, and I came back. I don't know exactly what year it was, but I think it may have been like 2004, 2005. They created the short corridor. So prior to the short corridor, Pelican Bay SHU is huge, right? Now you would think it's very, very small because it's built like that. It makes you think it's small and it's closing in on you, but it's actually huge. And one of the most effective things this policy of segregating us had was it was years. Sometimes we go years without seeing each other. You could be in a pod in a section, and you could be the only black person in there for 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, it's just, and that was very effective in terms of being an antidote to effective organization. Groups need to be able to communicate. So there was a story that came out on 60 Minutes. The state kind of panicked, so they decided, well, we're going to move the leadership of all the groups to the short corridor. So
Mm,
they created the short corridor. That's what we called it. I believe they called it officially the Communication Management Unit. It
mm,
was Delta 1 through 4. So we all moved back there. At least, I don't know what the criteria was. It was supposed to be the top 25 in each group, but who the hell knows?
yeah.
But they filled that joint up and they removed us from the regular hole and they created this hole within a hole. And they thought that was going to be a crushing blow, but what it actually did was it brought folks who hadn't spoken to each other in decades together, sometimes right next door to each other. So
Yeah.
those conversations that needed to take place to heal those wounds. Because remember, the racial thing was big in California. I mean,
Yep.
folks been murdered, killed, the whole nine. There were deep, deep wounds and hatreds and resentments, and those things needed to be worked through before there was ever going to be any kind of joint action, hunger strike or otherwise. And then making that move, the state kind of created space for those conversations to take place. And that was like the spark that really made the hunger strike possible. It was a miscalculation on the state's part.
Okay.
Yep.
So what had to happen as far as like filing paperwork and actually like how did that information get the hunger strike to actually start?
So the court case didn't drive the hunger strike. If anything, the hunger strike drove the court case.
Yeah.
Look, there have been 1,000 court cases. I remember being in Pelican Bay SHU in the early '90s when Madrid versus Gomez was supposed to be the big case that was going to set everybody free. And I didn't have indeterminate at that time, but
Yeah.
it was a regular hole even with indeterminate. So I was around my brothers that did have indeterminates. And Madrid versus Gomez was supposed to be the keys, and it's going to change the system. And it ended up it wasn't. So the court thing has been ongoing for
Hmm.
decades. I think the thing that made the court thing um, effective was the hunger strike. Because remember, all of those other court cases kind of happened in the shadow of prison.
Yeah.
Folks didn't know what was going on. The hunger strike kind of brought eyes where folks were educated and really able to evaluate.
For somebody out here who may be watching this and they're thinking, um, on the other side of the fence, what if they're sitting here going, who cares if a bunch of the worst of the worst of the worst starve themselves and die? Like, what does that matter? Like for them, like what does that matter? Like why does a hunger strike matter?
Okay, so one, and that was if you distill the state's power down to one single component, controlling the narrative. You just said it, the worst of the worst.
Yep.
Right? That ain't an accidental flip of the words. You didn't heard that 1,000 years. That's the state telling you.
Hey,
That was
it was on the commercial every night while
and
you're
that
having
became
dinner.
the truth
Yep.
because there was no opposition.
Toughest beat in America.
because there was no opposition to it. We didn't have a voice. We was tucked away in a hole within a hole. We
Hey,
couldn't say
healing
hell
each
no.
other, having healing conversations,
Having healing
and
conversations.
educating each other.
We couldn't say, hey, I haven't had a disciplinary infraction for 30 years. We couldn't say that. We couldn't say, I'm not back here because I murdered somebody. I'm back here because I have a tattoo.
Yeah,
We couldn't say that. We didn't have a platform where the state could continue to repeat that, and that became a reality. So you ask, well, why does it matter? Um, it matters because the state is a representation of you.
hmm
If you're a citizen and you're out there free, what the state does, they're doing in your name. Do you
yeah,
want people being literally tortured in your name?
mm,
Now, if it's some faraway thing in El Salvador, maybe you can turn a blind eye. But this is being done in your name with your money
yeah,
and being lied to boot.
yeah,
Is that what you want? Now, if that's cool with you, then so be it. We know where you stand. But most people, it wasn't cool. Most people said, well, they told me it was this, and now I'm finding out it's really not. You know,
yeah,
some of these dudes might actually be somebody that's into something, but some of these dudes don't belong
yeah.
back here.
And certain people, like the aforementioned guy earlier with that certain crime, like people may want to see him under the jail, but when he's not, and everybody else is, it kind of goes, well, what the hell's going on?
And that's the thing. The folks, I mean, some certain crimes, let's be real, have stigmas to it, right?
Yeah,
That's not who was back there.
yeah,
That's, now, if you look at the commercials, you would think that that's who was back there, but that's not at all who was back there. Who was
yeah,
back there are the people, and I'll just say it like this, with political views, with resistance in their heart, who
yeah.
just wasn't trying to cooperate and go along with what they thought was not only illegal but inhumane. That's who got locked up.
Hmm. Yep. I know from the grievance process, you could only get so far, and it's usually denial, 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 denial. You know what I mean? So you got everybody on a hunger strike. How long did it actually last before it cracked and things got to start to improve?
I don't think it ever cracked. It lasted for 19 days, and it was a pause. While the governor and the secretary were on TV, like we'll never negotiate with terrorists. In the daytime, they was getting on a helicopter and flying up there to negotiate. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Oh, there was like a good faith pause, and then you saw things. I'm gonna tell you something. Leading up to the hunger strike, like to say the month leading up to the hunger strike, we got more in that month than we got the whole 30 years Pelican Bay had been in existence.
dang.
For decades, we've been asking for simple stuff like a handball. Now, remember, you in a cell by yourself, you go out to a yard by yourself, a very small yard that's basically a room with a little crack in the ceiling,
Yeah,
right? And we asking for a handball, and they denying it. Well, that's safety and security. Okay, can you put some pull-up bars out there?
yeah,
Safety and security. You essentially went out there and walked around in a circle for an hour and a half by yourself. That month leading up, we got all of that. Phone
damn.
call. They didn't even have phones in the SHU. That month leading up, they came and installed phones. And let me tell you something about the phones. We have been deprived of conversation with our loved ones for so long. None of us knew how to work phones.
Dang.
We didn't know. When we're in general population, they had real people, right? Like operators. We
Yeah,
didn't know how to work the phone. It took us a certain amount of time to just figure out how the phone operated. Clothing, they started to allow us personal clothing like sweatsuits. We didn't know our size. I got 5X sweatsuit. We didn't know our sizes. We've been
yeah,
in basically underwear for all these years. Nobody knew what the sizes were. I
yep,
mean, imagine that. We were that far removed from normalcy
yep,
that operating a phone, a public phone, and what size clothes you wear was
yep.
beyond us.
You talking about a prison inside of a prison inside of a prison?
Yep. A prison inside of a prison inside of a prison.
Mm,
Oh, we under 2 minutes.
yep. Um. So we talked about pretty much everything. Uh.
One more thing, really, really quick.
Yep.
In hostilities agreement,
Yeah.
definitely want to touch on that. That is the legacy of the hunger strike.
Yep.
Without the hunger strike movement, that would not have been possible. And that's still in effect to this day. Has it been tested? Sure. But it has withstood the test of time. It's still in effect. From time to time, you have flare-ups in the California system. But for those of us who was in it in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, nothing like it was. There's um yeah, there's still remnants of the hunger strike that live through the end of hostilities that are really helping folks to this day. Even folks who didn't participate in the hunger strike, who weren't in the PNN, you're benefiting from it. And let me tell you why. Folks are getting out now.
Yeah,
Cannot have folks getting out or folks coming in to teach classes that are necessary to getting out when you have people being murdered every day and shot.
yeah,
That's not the reality of modern prison, and that is because of the end of hostilities agreement.
yeah. That's cool. Um, I was gonna say this is probably gonna cut, but I appreciate your time, man. Thank you for all the hard work you put in, man, to become the person you are today, man. It really shows, and I know the world's a better place with good Jamala. You know what I mean?
Thank
Yeah,
you so much. I appreciate that.
yes, sir. And thanks for sharing everything you did with everybody.
Absolutely.
I hit boom, stop recording.